with our guest speaker, Dr. Sarena Che Omar, who is the Deputy Director of Research from Khazanah Research Institute. I would like to now invite Tengku Ashraf, Executive Director of HBS, to give us his welcome note and an introduction to our speaker for today.
Yang berbahagia Profesor Dr. Ishak, Pro-Chancellor of Masar University. Yang berbahagia Profesor Dr. Ikram Shah Ismail, Vice-Chancellor of Masar University. Associate Professor Dr. Khazanah Chief Operating Officer of Masar Group of Educational Institutions. Our speaker for today, Dr. Sarena Che Omar, the Deputy Director of Research in Khazanah Research Institute. Group Directors, Senior Directors, Deans, Researchers, members of faculty, and students. Good evening and welcome to another installment of Haniffa Business School's Research Seminar Series. I'm Tengku Ashraf, the Executive Director of HBS. The main vision of HBS is to educate, build, and create future global leaders in entrepreneurship and management. As a postgraduate business school, we strive to ensure that our students and researchers are up to date with the latest development and trends that are currently occurring in the business world. I'm glad to say that with us today we have Dr. Sarena Che Omar, the Deputy Director of Research in KRI, and she'll be delivering a talk titled Understanding Malaysia's Food Security, a Policy Perspective. Dr. Sarena completed her PhD in Plant Science at the University of Oxford. At KRI, her research areas are mainly on policies related to food, agriculture, and sustainability. She has co-authored several key publications while she's in KRI, including the status of the paddy and rice industry in Malaysia, implications of the dominant shift to industrial crops in Malaysia, and several others. The topic here today is an extremely important issue, not just locally, but globally as well. As some of you might know, the Russia-Ukraine conflict that began earlier in the year has unfortunately contributed to a global shortage of agricultural feedstock, which has inevitably led to an increase in food insecurity across the world. Malaysia was not spared from this, as we saw a massive chicken shortage earlier in the year as one of the examples. However, as I'm sure Dr. Sarena will be talking about later, there are several dimensions to food security. If you look at the Global Food Security Index, which is the widely established index made use to judge a country's level of food security, they've measured four main dimensions: affordability, availability, quality and safety, and natural resources and resilience. I'm sure Dr. Sarena will be able to explain and go into detail the different dimensions, as well as how Malaysia fares in each of the dimensions. To everyone here, I'm confident that all of us here will immensely benefit from the talk given by Dr. Sarena today. Without further ado, let's all invite Dr. Sarena in giving her a round of applause to deliver her talk. Thank you.
Hello everybody, to the Pro-Chancellor, to the VC, to ladies and gentlemen, professors, and Tengku Ashraf, thank you for having me on board. It's a pleasure to be here. Just to let you know, my mom is an old-timer in Masar, she's retired. So I grew up coming here and seeing how Masar has grown, and it's just so nice to come here and see all this happening, and it's great to be able to present today. So I'm going to share with you, you've heard about food security. Everyone's talking about it. Food security, food import, are we producing enough food? Chicken prices are up. So there's a lot about this topic in Malaysia. But what is really important is to understand you're all coming from the academic side. So I'm giving you a very fresh thinking about how governments and policymakers look at things. And so sometimes you go like, I do all this research, why don't they listen to me? Because they are looking at it from a slightly different angle, perhaps. So I'm just giving you another perspective of how we approach policy studies. So Khazanah Research, if some of you haven't heard of, it's funded by Khazanah National. It is our board of trustees. Tan Sri Noor Yaakob is our chairman. The MD of Khazanah National is our board member, together with the EDs. We are a bunch of just a small group of 20 to 30 researchers. We come from the academic background, but we've shifted. So instead of producing journal articles, we produce policy reports. Very slightly different, but not that different lah. Same family lah, kita semua. So my colleagues and I, we specialize in different areas. So we step back and say, what's the issue of the country? So people say housing is an issue, food security is an issue, poverty is an issue. Okay, we hire a few thinkers, we come in and we try to solve the solution. So that's what we do at Khazanah Research. So myself, I specialize in agriculture, food security, sustainability issues. Those are my areas. We're quite young. We were established in 2014, so and a very small organization. So this is food security and agriculture research at Khazanah Research. It started off with Prof. Jomo and Prof. Fatima from UPM, and some of you might recognize her. They are economists. But my MD decided that they don't want economists anymore, not to say they're wrong, they're right. But instead of just an economist looking at policy research, they decided to hire people from different multidisciplinary backgrounds. So I myself am a plant scientist, I'm not an economist. My colleague here is an anthropologist, Ku Wei Yang. Nick Anis specializes in food security, and Dr. Teo is a nutritionist. And between all of us, we try to solve food security from a different lens, together with the guidance of Prof. Jomo. Prof. Fatima, she used to be our fellow, but not anymore. So myself, I've been around for 8 years, policy on agriculture. My background is actually in plant science. I grow. People say you do policy research in agriculture. You know how to grow or not? Well, I can tell them I myself planted cocoa padi, but in Oxford lah, not in Kedah. But I myself grown them, and biotechnology in university in Lincoln. So these are some of the reports. It's all freely available. So that's the policy of Khazanah Research. We do research and it must be made publicly available. So if you just Google, you can find all this research. I've looked into proteins and insects as animal protein, cocoa farming, paddy industry. We look at the psychology of food security. For example, during the MCO, there were an increase in the consumption of alcohol as well as junk food. So we try to understand that and what's happening. So like I said, food security isn't just about import. It's a whole dynamic of things happening. So what is food security? Let's get everyone here on the same page. Is it about import? Sorry for the photo, for the logos, but is it about import? If you notice in the newspapers, it's always a headline: Malaysia import 60 billion. We are trade deficit. Malaysia is import dependent. If you notice, there's always those headlines. But okay, if we rely on import, it makes us a little bit more vulnerable. But is that the only key criteria in measuring food security? Is it? Or maybe it does make you vulnerable, but as a whole, does it make you vulnerable? So these are the issues that I want you to think about. Second thing is always about self-sufficiency. You always see this in the newspaper. Malaysia tak cukup beras. Malaysia ayam. Okay lah, ayam we are self-sufficient. Tapi beef not enough. So there's always this topic about Malaysia should produce everything that we eat. Now again, is that a right strategy? If we produce everything, does that make us food secure? So that is something we should really reflect from the nation's perspective. Obviously, from a farmer, they will say they want to produce everything. Obviously, from a businessman, they also say the rice is important because they are the producer of rice. But from a nation's perspective, we need to ask ourselves, is that the answer? So the 4 pillars, like what Tengku Ashraf said, there are 4 pillars of food security that defines it, which means that people all the time must not just physical, right? It's not just there, but you need to be able to afford it, and not even afford it, you know how to cook it, and you know how to eat it nutritionally, and it is enough for you to have an active lifestyle. That is food security. So you got to be able to, as a nation, we have to address all of that. So these are the 4 pillars, an example to all of you. So when we talk about availability being present, of course, betul lah, import and self-sufficiency is a pillar, but it's not the only pillar. So I'm saying that it is there, but it's not the only answer. So in availability, yes, you have food stock. We know they always talk about rice. We have enough stock. We have enough supply. In agricultural infrastructure, SSL, access here is two, physical as well as affordability. So when you hear about prihatin, when you hear about BRIM, these are matters related to affordability of the food. It doesn't matter if you can produce all the food, but if it's so expensive, no one can afford it. Sorry, I'll go back. Utilization is all about nutrition, whether you're using it right. For example, if I have vegetables, but I don't know how to cook it and I don't know how to get the most nutrient out of it, it is a food security issue. And the last thing is stability. So even if I can produce all the food, but there's one big tornado and it clears all the land in Kedah and there's no rice, it's a food security issue. So from what's happening at the government side is that these are what we call short-term measures or short-term problems. Short-term problems requiring short-term solutions. And this is what's bugging the politicians. It's not wrong, but it just means that this is what they're addressing on a day-to-day issue. So harga siling ayam, if you notice, it came out in the news a lot. The poultry issue, the fertilizer issue, the cash assistance, the prihatin, the BRIM, the import ban, the export ban of chicken, tariffs. These are all short-term solutions, and these are solutions taken by governments around the world to address immediate issues. Now, if you do not address immediate issues, that's when you have riots. So it is important for them to address short-term issue. The problem is, if you address short-term issue on a long-term basis, that's where the problem comes in. And here's the thing, Malaysia, I mean, not just Malaysia, but many countries, they worry about the short term. Now, if you have a government that changes every 2 years, 3 years, that's also a short-term issue. And what they worry about is to appease the people right now. So that's where you do all these measures. And that's why you see all these measures happening. But then there's the long-term part. The long-term part is the utilization and the stability, because nutrition, nobody sees that as urgency, right? Because if you eat junk food today or the next 5 days, you're not going to die. So people don't see nutrition, I'm not saying it's not important, but they don't see it as an urgent matter. Climate change, sustainability, these are long-term. But mind you, if you keep thinking about the short term, the next thing you know, it's been 5 years. And you've done nothing with utilization and stability. And that's what's happening in many of the countries in the world. That's what's happening, unfortunately, in Malaysia. So my job is actually to keep reminding the government, don't forget about this last part as well. So that's what I try to do every day, telling them. So national policies, so some of you may or may not know this is what's guiding us. Agro Makanan 2.0, 2021, 2030, and because of the whole obsession with recent worries of food security, there's this Pelan Tindakan Dasar Security. I'm happy to say that they do comply with the 4 pillars. They do. So the document is nice. But of course, when you are in a daily issue and you're the Prime Minister and people are complaining about harga ayam, the best thing you can do is chop off the price, introduce ceiling price, for example. But anyway, the most of the initiatives are here. Now, how do you measure food security, right? You say food security, but how do you measure it? And I just told you all, it's not about import per se, it's not about SSL. So how do you measure it? And people have been scratching their head trying to measure this, but there are qualitative measures, and most universities, they would tend to go for the qualitative measures. So if you notice one professor in one department, they would look at Petaling Jaya, they would do a little survey or a little questionnaire. That's normally what you have, interview and focus group discussion. At the national level, the governments, they tend to look at what we call composite indicators, which is the GFSI that Tengku Ashraf mentioned. Composite indicators look at the household income, poverty line index, supply issues. These are what we call environmental. So when I mean environment, I don't mean the environment as in nature, but the environment as in the type of indicators. Outcome-based, I won't talk too much about that, but there are then surveys. So qualitative, it's usually very, very intuitive, but very localized. So when you're looking at it from the nation's perspective, you can't really answer the whole Malaysia question by doing there's a funny noise that comes in, right? Where is that coming from? Okay, so it's very intuitive. You get the nuance, but it's usually not helpful at the nation level. And then you have quantitative, and this is what you have. It's very replicable, at least for the GFSI, but it uses multiple databases. The survey, that's also very common in universities that you all are always here to surveys, and that's usually common among governments and universities. The thing with surveys is very expensive. So it can cost millions to do a nationwide survey. So usually it's only governments or very well-funded organizations. For universities, what they tend to do is they tend to do like a small district in a certain area. Now the problem with these surveys is that it's not annual. So next year is a different story. So you have to do again and again. And imagine spending 3 million. We did a national survey, it cost us 3 million. And I can't do that every year, 3 million. So what normally happens is everyone goes to the GFSI. Because that one automatic, Dawson will produce, Department of Statistics will produce data, and then you churn stats every year. So that's the way that's been done. But I'll share with you there are challenges to that as well. So according to the Global Food Security Index, which is the most holistic way of measuring food security as of now, Malaysia is ranked at 39, which is not too bad, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. We are in between. We do good in some areas, like availability. We don't do so well in stability, which what I just told all of you. We are so focused on supply and import that we forgot about our oceans and rivers and the environment. So we actually scored quite badly in that area. Utilization is not too bad because we have good access to chicken, egg. Actually, poultry in Malaysia is quite cheap. So we are very lucky to have good source of high quality protein. So we scored a little bit better there. But these are the sub-indicators. And this is what we call a more holistic way to measure food security. And in the Asia Pacific, Malaysia, again, we did pretty well. We are just below New Zealand, Singapore, Japan, but we did fairly better than all of our neighbors. So in a way, Malaysia is all right, but we can do better. So again, back to what I was talking to you about. Food products are imported from other countries to meet needs and demands of our country. So in 2020, for example, we imported about 55 billion ringgit worth of food. And there is a trade deficit, meaning here, although this is a trade deficit, so it shows positive, but what it means is that we are importing more than we are exporting. And as you can see, the line is going upwards. So that's where people panic and people say, oh my God, Malaysia is importing too much. And it gives the impression that we rely a lot on import and that we're vulnerable to global price volatility, which is true. I'm not denying that. But are there ways to protect ourselves? And another thing I want to kind of give you guys a different perspective. You see this increase, it's also a reflection of prosperity. I don't know if any of you remember this, but growing up, we don't eat avocados and strawberries everywhere in coffee cafes. But now, our time, avocado is everywhere. We import a lot of avocados. Salmon, we eat a lot of salmon these days. We don't growing up. So prosperity in Malaysia means diversification, which means we're importing more strawberries, more avocado, more oyster, more salmon, which is why our import deficit is going higher. Does it mean Malaysia should start farming salmon and avocado? No, we shouldn't. We should just be focusing on what we're good at. That's the answer. So this is also explaining to you why we're importing more, because we're just demanding more. Okay, does it mean self-sufficiency, right? So for you who's not too familiar, self-sufficiency really means that we produce our own food. And a lot of the pressure is to produce, we are self-sufficient in some areas we're not. Like chicken, we're self-sufficient, but beef, we're so bad at it. Dairy, we're so bad at it. Vegetables, we're actually self-sufficient in a lot of the tropical ones, like spinach, kangkong, sawi. We're pretty self-sufficient. But of course, we're not self-sufficient in rocket salad. We're not self-sufficient in some of carrots and potatoes. Of course, we're not. So because of that, then it looks like we're not 100% self-sufficient in vegetable. But again, it's these vegetables that are temperate countries are bringing down the numbers. So I just want to kind of put it down, the concept to you all, and I'll give you a little story, okay? I want you to imagine something, that just imagine all of the rice in the whole Malaysia is produced in Langkawi. We are self-sufficient. Imagine, okay? So all the rice is produced in Langkawi, but the ferry broke down. So there's a physical issue. So that is a food security issue. But imagine if we fix the ferry, but it's so expensive in KL, you cannot afford it. It's a food security issue. If you can afford it, but your kids don't know how to cook the rice, it's a food security issue. So it doesn't matter if it's cheap, if it's physically available, but you don't know how to cook it, it's food security issue. And here's the last part. Even if you can cook rice, but you don't eat chicken, you don't eat vegetables, you don't eat fruits, it's a food security issue. So I want you all to appreciate that it's not just about rice self-sufficiency. It's that from the nation's perspective, we really have to attack from many different angles. Okay, net food importance aren't exactly, okay, this is an interesting one. I'll show you some data. Okay, so Singapore and Malaysia, okay, Singapore does pretty well, but they don't produce any food, right? They are a total net importer of everything almost. So Malaysia, they are ranked higher than Malaysia, and their overall score is pretty good. So if the argument is, if you produce all your food, you get rid of volatility, right? Global volatility. So therefore, countries that produce food, net exporter of food, like India, Vietnam, Thailand, they technically should be more food secure, right? Because they produce all the food. But they rank far worse than Malaysia and Singapore. Why? Because of the whole dynamic of income, of nutrition, of sustainability, of all that dynamics, they actually scored worse. So does it mean, like if you ask me, Sarena, does it mean we don't produce anything? No, we should produce. But because we're a tropical country, we should still produce what we're good at. But it doesn't mean we should struggle to produce everything under the sun for the sake of just being self-sufficient. That's the concept that I want you all to appreciate. In other words, competitive advantage. Okay, that's the conclusion. Isn't just about self-sufficiency. There's 4 dimensions. Now, how do we quantify food security? Like I mentioned to you initially, we spoke about that there are many different methods, and then we honed down into GFSI, Global Food Security. Now, I want you to think about it. Global food security, they look at the nation level, right? But here's a little scenario I want you to look at these stats that we picked up from Department of Statistics Malaysia. When you look at a household income, it varies across the states. It's not uniform. Of course, you can argue if you're poorer in Kelantan, but cost of living is lower, therefore your poverty line is different. True. But what I want to show here is that it's not monotonous, it's not the same. It's very different across states. Household size is also different. So you can be really, really high, or you can earn 5,000 but have 1 kid. But you can also earn 5,000 and have 10 kids. And that is an impact of your food security vulnerability as well. So if you can see, it varies across the states. Where am I getting it? I'll show you another example. Poverty line index, the PLI. Again, it's so different across states. The PLI of Selangor and Pahang is so much better than Sarawak, Sabah, and Kelantan, right? That's the PLI. So, and you also know that angle score, which is a proportion of your income, increases on food as income, which means the poorer you are, the bigger the proportion you spend on food, the more vulnerable you are. And this is an important thing to remember because, here's another example, household mean rice consumption. Even rice consumption, the most basic, actually varies across the states. Now, this is an important thing to highlight. For example, East Malaysia, so you can see that Kedah and Penang and Perlis produce all the rice, so they should be food secure. But they're not the ones requiring the most rice. It's actually Sabah and Sarawak. So, what does it mean is that GFSI is great for a country that's small like Singapore and Brunei and Hong Kong. But if you want to do policy studies, you can't just look at this rank and say Malaysia 39, let's include a policy recommendation. You can't, because Penang will be totally different from Sarawak. Perlis is totally different from Selangor. So policy recommendations need to come in a little bit more detailed if you want to do it a bit more actionable at the state level. Because like I said, food security varies across these different states. So Malaysia has 13 states, different weaknesses. So maybe Sabah, for example, is more exposed to climate change, more than KL. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just giving you an example. So because of that, state level governments have to tackle it differently. But right now, they only have the GFSI to rely on. So there are still debates on how we can best quantify this. At the nation level, it's interesting because you can compare countries, but really when it comes down to doing something, it's not enough. You actually need it to be more detailed. So that remains a problem, not just for Malaysia, for United States, for New Zealand, for UK, big countries with really differences in their states. So that's my current work actually at KRI. We're trying to figure out how to measure food security at the state level and individual level. If you are interested in this or if you have suggestions, I'm very open to your feedback. And we will work towards a more comprehensive way of national food security. So thank you so much, everyone. That's it.
So that was a very interesting topic, isn't it? Now you look at food very differently from now on, right? Okay, yeah, it's a Q&A. Anyone has any questions? Did you like to ask? I can bring the mic to you, don't worry. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. Well, I am from the CAP program, so food security is something which is quite new to a lot of us, and which you have said that, you know, it is something which is very serious that everybody ought to be talking about it. Now, my question is, you were talking about availability, and then you're talking about access. It's just not good enough to have food being available but not accessible. Now, I also read the report of the Department of Statistics Malaysia. Those people who are in the lower income group, 34.5% of their wages, those that are earning minimum wages, they are actually spent on food. And this is actually rising at a much faster rate than the salary that can keep pace. So, you know, I mean, it is always trying to chase the food, the cost of the food. So, how do you manage this kind of problem?
Thank you very much. Actually, my colleague is looking into the wage issue. Khazanah Research acknowledged, in fact, it's a very serious issue, that wage in Malaysia has stagnated, but inflation is rising high. Short term, actually, bantuan prihatin, bantuan subsidy is good for short term. Short term means it should be at least 1 year or 2 years, but nothing more. Long term, it's really about increasing the wages, because you don't want to punish farmers from doing good agricultural practice, which will tend to cost more. So good food will cost more. You see, food that is produced irresponsibly and cheaply is usually cheap. I can give you an example. A lot of the vegetables in Cameron Highland is cheap, but it may not necessarily be the sustainable and safe in terms of pesticide. And then you have some of those with MyGap certification. They are qualified, safe, HACCP and all that, but they are more expensive because it takes more to do it. So, but what we don't want is to punish these people from producing good food. So the way forward is that wages need to go up. But of course, we have the employers who will all, not agree to that. The private sector won't agree to that. And that's the work of my other colleague to work on that. But totally agree, wage is an issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sarena. Very interesting, as Dr. Ishaq also mentioned. There is one aspect, actually, I have read this a couple of times, which is the wastage of food. Malaysia is one of the highest in terms of wasting the food. The most recent is Local and Housing Minister, Dr. Rizwan. He said on April 25th, I'm quoting his words, he said, we can feed 3 million people 3 meals a day for the waste of food that what we are doing. And ministry has converted that wastage into ringgit, dollars and cents. They say every household in Malaysia, around 210, we are wasting. which constitutes to 2,600 a year. That's not a small amount, each household. So, I mean, I'm wondering, if one is we produce, another one is we import. To me, the third important factor is how do we use, and then how do we consume, and are we consuming probably correctly? Probably Singapore is scoring. My feeling, unless we look at the data from both Malaysia and Singapore, probably Singapore scored high. Probably because of that. I'm not so sure because I don't have data like what you guys are having. But this is one of the important factor also to consider in terms of food security. What do you think?
Okay, I'll explain why Singapore is so high. Number one, the wages is high. So they scored really high on wages. Also because there's another reason, they have very strong bilateral and multilateral trade agreements with other countries. And I'll just give you another example. Now, if Singapore has a food security issue at cukup beras, they only have how many million? 5 million people? So they just bring one barrage of shipment. But Malaysia is 32 million. So if you have rice issue, it's a serious problem. So Singapore, they score better because they're so small that actions are easily solvable. That's another big example. And actually, in the GFSI, there is wastage. I can't remember exactly how Malaysia scored, but Malaysia is definitely a wasteful country, and that is certainly something that we should look into in addressing together. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Anor from QSR Brands Berhad Group Strategy. I think I'm one of the few industry here. So, question to you, what do you think would be the role of industry players such as us? For example, everybody knows us as KFC or Pizza Hut operators in multiple countries, but then we also own our own feed mills, poultry farms, and so forth. I mean, how would you see that being translated into supporting food security in Malaysia?
Thanks. Nice to see a private sector here. One of the things you guys can do is to support good agricultural practices. So the Malaysian MyGap, Malaysia Good Agricultural Practices, is based on international good agricultural practices. And farmers go out of their way to get this certification. And it's important for consumers and big players to recognize that. So even for poultry, for eggs, right? When you go to the shop later, ladies and gentlemen, look at your egg carton. There's only a few that has the MyGap certification. Buy that egg because they are the ones that's responsible. And I think it's good to support them on that matter.
Okay. My name is Ahmed. Okay, I'm coming from Bulu Berhad. I spent almost the whole of my life for food security and agricultural projects and so on.
Yay!
I have a background of agriculture and farming. Then I ventured into finance, MBA. Then another one business economy. Then now I'm doing another one is in management. So far, I am very happy to mention all these things. The whole I have grown right because I tried to explain these things to people. And people couldn't understand the importance of food security before COVID. So we should thank the COVID to make this chance for us to sit together today and think about the food security issue. By the way, one of the areas that I think I like to highlight is the middleman. The middleman in Malaysia, they took 70% of the profit. And the people cannot afford to buy the food, and the farmers struggle for even bear his cost. No profit, we don't talk about profit, even cannot cover its own cost. And the middleman is the ones in this between and take 70%, minimum 70% of the thing. And one of the reasons of the wastage is not because of the people or because of the farmers. It's all games played by the middleman to put the farmers in the miserable situation and they don't take those products until they try to give them at a better price. Or even I know someone, they don't distribute, they let the product spoil because they want to control the price of the market. And the worst situation is come when we talk about animal feed. There is a giant, they are controlling everything, and they don't let the animal feed flow happen, and the farmers go into the very bad situation. I have been in the, I had the chicken farm, I had the dairy farm last time. You cannot eat food when your animal doesn't have food to eat. Very dangerous situation. So I want you to highlight what is the policy really can apply. However, after this, I want to share with you my solution also. Thank you so much.
I didn't think there was a question there, but thank you for your sharing. Oh, how to address the middleman? Was that your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. I don't. When I do policy research, I try not to target a segment of the supply chain, because when you think about policy, the middlemen behave in such a way because the policy enhances them to behave that way. So the middlemen in the paddy industry behave like that. They manipulate, they were timbang a bit different. They did all of that because there's a policy that is shrinking their profit margin. So the behavior of the industry is normally, okay, it's not one evil man. It's usually they behave such a way because the environment makes them behave that way. So when I think of it from a policy side, I try not to ask myself, what do I do with you? I try to think about how do we change the environment to make them a bit more nicer. So the paddy and rice industry, I can give you an example because that's the work that I've done. To solve the middleman, you need to release their price ceiling and price floor. What happened, and this is happening in the chicken industry as well, just recently when the introduction of price ceiling, when you have price ceiling at the top, price floor at the bottom, and you keep reducing, the middle guys need to survive, and they'll do whatever it takes to survive. Naughty things, nice things, they'll do whatever it takes. So policies need to change. That's what I say. Short-term measures cannot be long-term because it will encourage these guys to be naughty. So, price ceiling, subsidy, floor, GMP, and all that can't be long-term. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. So it was a very nice talk by you just now. Very interesting. Of course, food security is a very important topic now. And we can see that in the newspapers. I was just reading an article by you in the start about food security. I was just reading through. But when I was in school, and that was a very long time ago, we were taught by teachers that Malaysia is one of the main producers of rice. When I was in school then. But now sadly, we can see that rice is being imported. We don't produce rice as much as we can. And plus, we are importing rice to Malaysia. And I was in Iran about a few years ago. And I was surprised that in Iran, Iran is a desert, basically. They are planting rice. They're having rice in certain areas, north of Iran. And I was very surprised. A country which is mainly of desert, rocks and stones, but they are planting rice. And they are doing it. And they are physically doing it. So basically, Iran is basically looking at how to be self-sufficient in terms of, food security, food sense. So this is something that I was wondering, how long are we going to be in this way? Keep importing food without having to be self-sufficient. Because isn't it better to be exporting food rather than importing food? That's what we are facing, from US countries, rich countries are exporting food.
Okay. I'll be specific to rice, just for the rice. So actually, our self-sufficiency for rice is about 60 to 70, which is, I'd be worried if it's below 50. But above 60 is kind of okay. But we also have to remember that we want our sushi rice, we want our Korean rice, we want our basmati rice. So we always have the demand for import for these kind of rice varieties. And our Thai jasmine rice, and those are all the different types of rice that Malaysia don't necessarily produce because our soil is different. Now, can we be self-sufficient? Boleh. At what cost? Like in Iran, they do it. I'm sure it costs a lot because it's a desert. It's not a natural place for padi. Everything can be done at a cost. It's just whether we want to do it at all costs. Now, there is an export potential for Malaysia, but not actually in our cheap rice, the one that comes up to about 90% of the rice produced in Malaysia. It's not exportable, it's just the quality is more for making cheap rice for nasi campur, for to do all the noodles and kway teows. But if you export it, nobody wants to buy it. But there is an export potential for Sabah and Sarawak, which I will launch this report in this year, end of this year. Sabah and Sarawak has potential to produce because they have varieties that the whole world doesn't have. It's the next Parmesan Reggiano or the next, the next specialty product, that the next Musangking of Malaysia. So there is potential for export. Cumanya, it's not being exported because the Act Akta 522 protects rice in Malaysia. You cannot automatically export things. You cannot automatically move rice across states, for your information. And to have a license, you need 200,000 in your bank account for 3 months to get a license to be a miller or a brander or a wholesaler. So all that will stifle competitiveness and business friendliness. But if the question is protectionism, then it's okay. But if your question is why can't we export? We can't because of Act 522. So the question now is, can we differentiate between the two? That's what I'm trying to do. Can we differentiate between rice for protectionism to protect the supply, all of that, and we have the export one that can be sold for 22 ringgit per kilogram. That's the value of the rice in Sabah Sarawak. And that one, if you sell in UK, you get even more. So that's the answer.
Thank you very much. Because he mentioned my country, that's why I'm being so okay, the place they are planting rice in Iran is the northern region. This northern region is like tropical climate because it's beside of this Caspian Sea, so there's plenty of rains and so on. But there is something I need to highlight about the Iran rice. Iran rice has its own specific varieties, which in terms of quality is quite high. And the price wise is very expensive. In Malaysia, if I want to buy 1 kilogram, really Iranian rice is 70 to 100 ringgit per kilogram. Which for me is not even affordable to eat that rice. And in terms of the aromatic things, it's very different. So the production, the hectare also go to 4 to 5 tons. Here is around 900 to 1 ton. Okay. However, they're only planting once a year. Here plant 2 times a year. So one of the things I also, because I visited entire Malaysia, I spent a lot of years here to study. One of the things they have a problem of efficiency here. And this efficiency problem arises because the government subsidized the paddy farmers. So the paddy farmers only have 10 acres, they will receive 1,000 ringgit a month. To become 6,000 ringgit income for them. So they just little bit they work. They make 2,000-3,000 a month. So one person is enough for him because the lifestyle also is not that high. So the government pushed them to work like that. So they produce 900 to 1 ton. They are very happy. So this is also another issue. You have the land, you have the resources, you have the workers, you have the manpower. You need to just apply a little bit technology, and then better varieties and so on, and you can produce more. Then you can 70% now self-sufficient, then you have 200%, 300% self-sufficient, so you can export a lot. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Sarena. I have 3 main questions. So number 1 will be on the GFSI indicators specifically. Number 2 will be on the other areas of food security, and number 3 will be on the economic model for the cost factor. For the GFSI, so you mentioned that there are 4 dimensions that they capture, and I understand for each of the dimensions they use micro level data to capture the indicator of whatever dimension. So I understand that at least for Malaysia, I'm assuming for other developing countries as well, we're not that known for producing a very granular set of micro level data. So I'm wondering, is GFSI a good indicator to measure across all countries, even for developing countries, given that there could potentially be a management error on those countries' measurements of what local security? So that's number one. Number two, like you mentioned, there are, most organizations and the standards are normally, they all agree that 4 standards of security. Affordability is number one, and you have the rest, access, utilization, etc. You mentioned that, in the policy discussion, there's a heavy discussion on affordability, but not so much on the rest. What are the barriers preventing, these other elements of food security being addressed? Because I remember when in Bangladesh, when we did security research in the year of 2020, so that was the first year that Bangladesh actually formed its food security team, and it's when we approached you. And when I looked at the GFS data, it was telling the same story. Affordability, we're okay, but other dimensions, we're not so much okay. I'm wondering why has anything, or a lot of things changed in the past few years? Question number 2. Question number 3 is on this economic sector or the agricultural side as a whole. So you mentioned that Singapore pretty much don't produce any agricultural food except for maybe some urban farming food. The reason that is that not only they import, but a lot of people don't know that they import from over 150 countries, and that's one of the ways they mitigate all these global insecurities. For Malaysia, what is wrong with moving towards a future where we focus in only specific agricultural crops and products that we have a competitive advantage in, and we import the rest from a variety of many countries? As former economies, we look to the economy as a whole, and there are resources that need to be balanced with different sectors. You go to different sectors, different countries, they'll tell you the sectors where they need to be in that sector. So, but it's not feasible to be the best in every sector. You need to pick and choose. So if you look at the economic development of countries over the 100 years, there's the term used in literature is called structural transformation, where you move from being a heavy agricultural sector to manufacturing to services. So I'm wondering what is wrong with the idea of just focusing on several agricultural products. We import the rest, and we can focus the unused resources on the manufacturing sector and the gig economy sector.
Gotcha. I'll give you the last question first. Actually, we have been doing that. That's why oil palm is the biggest industry, crop agriculture industry in Malaysia. So we have done that intentionally and unintentionally because of economics. It just makes more sense because we'll make more money. Now, as a country develops, now if you know the economics of how a country develops, from agrarian, it becomes a manufacturing, from manufacturing it becomes services, right? But one thing people don't realize is actually full circle. When a country becomes a developed country, the consumers actually demand local high quality product. That is why you go to the US, not US, but UK, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, there's a lot of what we call local farms, local produce, artisanal products, and that is being championed as the product of choice. And they tend to go for that more. So Malaysia, actually the consumer, as we become a high income country, consumer behavior will change. And there will be more and more towards local food. So even though we may go for what you were saying, the economics of whether we focus on a few big things, but there will always be pockets of demand for local products. And coupled with, okay, maybe not the economics, but the culture and the biology. So I'm coming from a plant scientist perspective. The biology is that the paddy, for example, in Sabah, Sarawak, is just so valuable that you can make a lot of money by exporting it and making use of it. It's just untapped at this stage. Another thing is the cultural side, whereby when I visited the farmers in Sabah, Sarawak, they want to grow it because they feel it's part of their identity. And so, of course, the argument is if you want to be fully income secure, go and become an investment banker, live in there. But that's not the topic here. There are farmers in rural areas who still hunting paddy and they want to earn something out of it. It doesn't make them the richest person in KL or in Malaysia, but it's something that they can gain without having to tell them, clear your land and tanam oil palm. Because we from a policy side want them to remain their lifestyle, their quality of life. We want them to not change, but still improve their quality of life, if that makes sense. Because when you go and see the subsistence, we call it subsistence farmers, I have no heart to tell them, you should clear your land, get rid of all your culture, all your beliefs, and do this because it's richer than. But to them, maybe that's not what they want. They want to still continue planting paddy, but 100% of them will sell 50% of their produce because there's an excess. So they ask me what can they do so that they can sell this excess and at least earn a bit of money for medical, for education, and that's where we're looking at. So that's the first question.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
Okay, then back to the question, would it be possible then to enhance the level of technology they use in these areas so that they can have some free spare time to venture into, say, the economy?
Correct. Actually, technology is cherry on the cake. It's great, but even basic agricultural practices is not even there. So that is where you have NGOs and social enterprises who should come in with the global good agricultural practices, understanding of sustainability and all that, so that there can be a compromise. For example, the compromise is don't slash and burn now. Find out a way to make your soil fertile without having to burn things down. So there are compromises there. So to answer your question, there is some sort of compromise that can be done. It's not fully economics based, but it's also not fully emotional, somewhere in between. Now to answer your first question, the data obviously, when we look at GFSI, there are some issues with certain countries, but most of the time, because they go by, so data for climate change is worse. Because developing country and underdeveloped country don't care. So they won't have carbon amount, they won't have that biodiversity data, but most countries basic will have income data, supply data, import export, those are basic data, and that will comprise main parts of the GFSI. So the GFSI is on whole okay, but there are certain bits that's questionable. Not because the data quality is just not there for certain.
That's why I mentioned, I think for the, what's the first pillar?
Availability is quite okay.
Yeah, I'm not questioning
Quite
at
okay.
all, they're quite okay because it's mostly different.
Accessibility also quite okay.
The
When you look at the data, it's utilization is also, but the worst is sustainability.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the worst. Okay, your second question, can you
So among the 4 pillars, we've been talking about the first pillar very extensively for the last couple of years. Why hasn't there been much change on the third and fourth pillars?
Okay, so between the 4 walls or the 4 glass doors, a stable government is important to look at the long-term implementation of long-term policies. When you have a short-term government, the focus is always on short-term measures because we need to survive, and that's my short answer for you. So to address the long-term one, we need a long-term government. Yeah. Who wants to worry about climate change when your voters is going to vote for you next month? Yeah. So that's the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any other questions?
Yeah, one last question. Thank you so much for the interesting discussion. I would like to point out a few things which I'm deeply concerned about. Number one, just now you mentioned about climate change. As I'm speaking, I think half of Pakistan is underwater. Correct? Nearly 33 million people are affected. I'm not from Pakistan, okay? But this is a serious pointer. It says there is more to come, right? Because of climate change. Not only Pakistan, many countries are going to be affected in this way. Second is, many people talked about genetically modified food as a solution to food crisis, right? But does it fit in the 4 pillar, correct? And we look at the 4 pillars that we looked at. Third one, we also see problem of plenty, right? Where we have bumper crops and half of it goes waste because there is no supply chain, there is no warehouse issues. And now fourth, some people say the next world war is going to be fought on food and water. So when we put together all these issues, as a policy analyst, what is your perspective or what is your take on these issues and how exactly are we going to move to a more sustainable, which can incorporate, these 4 pillars?
Thank you. Very good question. I'm going to be futuristic now and talk about really cutting edge stuff because I'm a scientist, so I love cutting edge stuff. Now to answer your question, GM, I myself did genetically modified my stuff, right, when I was doing my PhD. So I am totally comfortable with genetically modified products. Now, just to tell you something, it's not the technology that is evil, it's the people. Nuclear energy can be the most greenest and responsible way to produce energy. It can also kill billions of people. So genetic modification is not bad. It's just people might take advantage of it if it's a private corporation, maybe they want to save the seed, I don't know. But the technology itself is not that bad, so I'm not too worried. Now, to answer your question, can it solve these food security issue? In fact, GM is already an old story. The new story now is what we call alternative protein cultured meats. That's the way forward right now. Cultured meats means I take stem cell from the chicken, for example, I culture in the lab, the mother that's still alive, the chicken is still alive, I culture it and it becomes poof, meat, and everybody eats it. So my colleague told me, Sarena, 20 years from now, our children will look at killing animal as barbaric, because in the future, everything will be just cultured, nothing is killed. Of course, it opens up the conversation, is it halal? Because we can't slaughter it. That's the thing I hope Jakim start talking about, because the problem with Malaysia, we are so bothered about other matters, we're not spending our brain thinking about cutting edge problems. They should be talking about this right now. Because Singapore already started producing cultured chicken. Malaysia is way behind, we are not even talking about it yet. But that's the answer. To be sustainable and to be able to produce, to feed the growing population, cultured products is the way forward. Of course, GM to a certain extent for crops, but maybe, it's still good agricultural practices that's not there yet in the whole world. Now, there are good agricultural practices in certain countries, but overall, it's quite bad. So that's not, technology and all that is cherry, but if your basic practices is terrible, you're not going to get anywhere. So even the basic, we should get it right first. Any other questions?
No question. Long, interesting debate, isn't it?
Very
Being
good.
longest ever
Yes.
because of
Because
food.
it's good.
Yeah.
We not only waste our food, we love our food, and now we want to know more about all these formulas,
Food security, everybody is concerned.
We had a temporary food security problem, but I see food there now.
Yeah, now we want to end fast, right? When we get to it.
That is genetically modified.
Okay,
Modified is not good for health.
I think the answer already given.
she didn't mention this now.
Definitely some negative impact will be there.
That will be for another day.
Another presentation.
Yes. Okay, so I guess our time for our session is up. So before we end officially, I'd like to invite Prof. Isha to hand over a token of appreciation to Dr. Sarena. Thank you. So we have a group photo. The picture. From Allah. Let's take one of this direction, and after that we'll take one more outside.
You want to cancel?
This way.